compassion. Compassion is defined as sympathetic pity and concern for the suffering or misfortune of others. But I agree with theologian Karen Armstrong that the word pity has some extra baggage. And it seems to me that that extra baggage is packed with the subtext of looking down on someone, seeing that person is somehow less than I am, and helping them because they are less than me. Or said another way, because I am in a position of power over. Pity just doesn't fit with my understanding of compassion. And compassion seems greater than this baseline concern. Concern is somewhat amorphous. It could be anything from being interested in, to being worried and anxious about, to actually caring about someone. Compassion, when contrasted with concern, is more focused than concern. Compassion, to me, is about how we behave toward one another, how we take care of one another while treating each other with respect and experiencing each other as having worth and dignity. Compassion springs from the abundance of love we have in our hearts that we can share, and from the belief we all have an enormous supply of loving kindness within us to treat not only ourselves well, but to treat all others that we come into contact with well. In a more compact way, I define compassion as intentionally, equitably, and actively caring for one another. So how does that understanding of compassion look nowadays? For over a week now, images of George Floyd's murder, what in essence, or in fact, was his lynching, has replayed countless times on countless media outlets. In my opinion, this has been in no way an expression of compassion by the news organizations. These never-ending replays of George Floyd's murder. I think to myself, have we as a nation become so desensitized and numb, and has our capacity for shock and righteousness and anger been so dulled that it takes this unending image of a black man being killed, murdered over and over again until we get up and do something about it? Has it become some grotesque theater, and have we become the audience who can't look away to the point that we need to leave our seats and do something? Then the rallies and the riots started. I'm supportive of the rallies. You know, as a matter of fact, some of us from UU Miami went out and rallied for Black Lives Matter this week on Highway 1. But I'm scared of the riots, to be honest. I do know that change will not come to our white supremacist culture easily. I realize that we're messy and that those riots are part of that messiness. And despite my fear, I'm willing to live with some of that messiness if change can happen. I just don't want us to provoke riots. It seems like no matter how peaceful the protest started out during the day, when night fell and curfews were enforced, riots happened. In some places, the police tried to control the protesters with violence, hurling smoke bombs, shooting rubber bullets, cutting people's tires, tasing people, punching people, escalating people, or generally peaceful people, to violence. Well, I'm not naive to say that all of those people that were out there were peaceful protesters. I know there were people out there who were taking advantage of the situation to escalate it. People that were not good. People from other places, people within the community who just wanted to steal or escalate violence. I know it was a tinderbox, just waiting for a match to be thrown, a flash bomb or a Molotov cocktail or a rock to be thrown, and suddenly everything bursts into flames. Windows broken, stores ravaged. Where's the compassion? How much training have the police have on how to handle situations like this in a peaceful way? To try to de-escalate, to engage, to connect. Particularly with those African American people out there dying of coronavirus, who've had for decades suffered from poverty and institutional racism. Over the many years of my counseling and ministry, I've had discussions about oppression and racism with people of color who suffered it over and over and over again. I've talked with people who've returned from stays in prison unable to restart their lives. I've talked with people who've been pulled over by police again and again for just driving while black. I've talked with parents of black children who tell me about the conversations they've had with their children to keep them safe and alive in this white supremacist culture. I've talked with homeless people who found it virtually impossible to get out of the cycle of homelessness without someone giving them a hand up. Not a hand out, but a hand up. And I've lent my voice to them when I could to support their causes and needs. Recently, I worked with an organization in Chicago to develop a program to equip people of color with effective skills in the event they were pulled over by police. And the police were involved in this program. People of color and police working together to see each other as human beings, share their feelings with one another about the legal issues involved in a traffic stop, and the fear and emotional issues, the anxiety involved on both sides. My friends, we are all just people. We're just trying to find our way through change. That's what today is about. That's what these marches are about. Finding our way through change. We've been all enculturated into a white supremacist way of seeing our culture, the system we live in. And some of us want to change that. You know, I've seen the police kneeling and praying with protesters. That's a great thing. I've seen people of color speaking out at the rallies about their needs to deal with racism. And as their discernment begins, discussions have started about defunding the police, demilitarizing the police, getting police trained in de-escalation, increasing police community involvement. I've heard organizers talk about abolishing the prison industrial complex or abolishing prisons altogether. I've heard discussions about how we need to stop calling the police, or at least stop calling the police at the first sign of something instead of the last. What's the alternative? Communities working together to deal with situations themselves, or perhaps training communities to learn how to deal with conflicts when they come up before calling the police. Now, some of you out there might think, Tom, Reverend Tom, these ideas are too radical and unrealistic. My friends, the time has come for us to sit down with each other, to listen to each other, to understand what the needs and feelings are in all of our cultures. If we are truly to make this country an equitable place for all. White people need to first ask those affected by racial inequity and injustice what they need. White people need to hold their judgment on the ideas that people of color have for meaningful solutions and effective directions, even if it makes them uncomfortable. As we say, no, we can't do that, well, the conversation shuts down. And we need to stay engaged in the conversation. The rallies, the protests, the violence, the questions, the thoughts, these are to get us started in these discussions. They are not the end of the discussion. At the Unitarian Universalist Association, we call it the UUA, had a vigil Wednesday night. And I heard them speaking of these ways to help us move forward to support change in our culture as we try to decenter whiteness. In broad categories, they say that we need learning, acting, and giving. As Unitarian Universalists, many of us are all about learning, reading, studying, talking about issues. But the learning I'm talking about, well, it's more than that. It's not only about reading a book like White Fragility. It's more than just talking about it theoretically. It's about engaging with it, with heart and soul. It's about looking at our own personal prejudices, fears, and behaviors that support this white supremacist culture that we're all in. It's about deciding how we might change ourselves to help society change. Acting is deciding what to do and doing it. I posted an article on my Facebook page from the UUA website that gives some ideas about how to decide on action. The article is called Risk, Courage, and Discernment, Spiritual Preparation. It asks questions of us as we think about all this to aid in our preparation and our discernment before taking social justice action. It asks questions like, is this action visionary? Is it reducing pain for other people? Does this action have moral authority? Is this action building our own or others' capacity? What role am I being asked to play? Which of our forebears, spiritual, family, social justice, have played a role in this? How can I lean into their wisdom? How can I do right by their legacy? It asks us to consider our privilege and our access to a stable lifestyle, or lack thereof, in doing this work. Reminding us that the goal is always to fight again another day. For this work, this culture change, is not short term. I thought about these questions Wednesday as members of our congregation were holding up their Black Lives Matter signs on Highway 1. So many people were honking in support, giving us thumbs up. It felt wonderful to be out there. And Chris Kirchner was dressed as an angel. You can see her there. 2 young African American girls drove up and stopped in a long line of cars. Here's a stoplight. And they took a picture of Chris, and one said, "I'm going to cry." And she did, emotionally overwhelmed by the symbolism of Chris's angel. And I thought, this is one right action we have made today. Being here. And finally, about giving. How do we use our resources to be change agents in the world, personally and as a congregation? How do we support Black Lives Unitarian Universalists, or DRUM, Diverse, Revolutionary, Unitarian Universalist, Multicultural Ministry? How do we support Black Lives Matter? These are organizations doing work to dismantle racism and work to support decentering whiteness in our denomination and in our culture. After all I've been doing this week, and experiencing, seeing, I revisited the questions by Tolstoy in that story that Shay and I read a little earlier. When is the right time? Who are the right people? What is the most important thing to do? I thought, now is the time. And you, my friends, are the people. You are the people I'm with right now. Even though we're in quarantine, even though it's summer, the thing I need to do right now with you is to offer the congregation opportunities to grapple with racism. You asked me when I came in as your developmental mentor, as one of my goals, to help you be in alignment with the UU's anti-racism work. It's time. It's time I offer space for this congregation to discern ways we individually and collectively can radically be compassionate, intentional, equitable, actively caring for those humans around us in need, particularly people of color and marginalized people. In the newsletter, you will notice that I'm inviting you to begin engaging and learning by studying the book White Fragility. My hope is that by engaging with this book and other books, that we will begin discerning action and giving for the good of others, particularly people of color and marginalized groups who are being choked by the cultural norms of our white supremacist culture. You might think to yourself, I already know what to do to help out in this civil rights issues. I already know. I've been a Unitarian Universalist my whole life, or whatever. But what I say to you is pause, my friends. Pause for a moment. take into consideration what people of color are suggesting. Before you act, look at the Black Lives Matter action of the week. Or consider giving to the National Bail Fund Network to help those who essentially are trapped in jail because they have no money to get out. These actions are being led by people of color. Remember, my friends, change in our culture ultimately comes not from white guilt, not from fear of riots, not from anger and frustration over bad individuals in the police force. Change comes as an act of compassion when we act from insight gained, when we develop beloved community, when we engage with one another with difficult issues that are on our hearts, issues that our society needs us to struggle with. This is that time for all of us to engage with these issues. On the blog of the Fallon Forum, written by the American activist and author Ed Fallon, Ed was talking about the symbolism of the police taking a knee and how that symbolism was immensely important. But he too was clear symbolism is not enough. He wrote, "We must all commit to working toward policy changes that shift the system away from the racism that has been accepted and perpetrated by many, even by ourselves. Equally, we must commit to personal efforts that shift us towards seeing each other's different cultures as part of what makes our society rich and beautiful, and to understand our differences even when we don't agree with them. And then, my friends, to hold each other up in love. So may it be."